Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Health Committee meeting for Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. It is the appointed hour. I'm calling the meeting to order. As we gather this morning, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history. And we are extremely grateful for their many and continuing displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have been careful stewards of this land for millennia. With that, Ms. Hill, has the roll been called, please?
Yes, roll has been taken and we have quorum.
Thank you very much. I would invite now disclosure of pecuniary interest and, if any, the general nature thereof, please. The chair recognizes none. I'd seek a motion now, a single motion for both sets of minutes. Mr. Kelly, is appropriate? Okay, thank you. He has indicated in the affirmative for those who are not seeing him on camera. Could I seek a motion to approve the minutes of the meetings held May 17th and the special meeting held May 31st, 2023, please? Councillor Wilmer, seconded by Councillor Weir. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There were no delegations at time of mailing. I believe that continues to be so, Mr. Kelly.
That does, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. With that, then, I'm going to go directly back to you, Mr. Kelly, for the Administration Department report, beginning on page 2, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I begin my report, just a few little items on the agenda. So you have received an addendum electronically, and if you need a paper copy, it can be distributed as well. That will be part of Chief Nolan's report as number 7, and there will be an item of new business that's also been distributed. That's a letter from Leeds and Grenville. We'll address that as part of Chief Nolan's report, but more succinctly as a resolution, potential resolution to you as new business later in the day. So, and one other item, if I can, for close, there will be an item C as an item for potential property purchase under the rules of closed meetings pursuant to section 239. So with that, on page 2 is administration report. Just a piece of correspondence that we did receive from the National Chronic Pain Society. They were looking for some assistance in terms of a resolution or in terms of supporting a letter back to them on an opioid concern, or opioid, I won't say crisis, but opioid concern for those addicted to pain medications. Unfortunately, I don't know much more about the National Chronic Pain Society than what you've received today. I have not done a large amount of research on it, but we'll note that as per conversations with Chief Nolan and his staff, the opioid crisis is something that is continually ramping up in our area, whether or not it's related to chronic pain medications or not. In any case, I'll leave that as the one piece of information to you for your consideration, Chair and Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Yes, this morning there was so much paper coming at me, I thought it was a confetti parade that I was being celebrated for something. Committee, any questions or comments on the administration report? Gordon Emo, please.
Thank you. I would like to see us support this or develop a resolution for County Council, I'm sorry, because pain management is something that I've recently become exposed to, and there is not a single one source of relief. There's a combination of medications, whether it's muscle relaxants or things that take away tremors or spasms, as well as managing the pain because they contribute to the pain. So, and I noticed in the correspondence about the 4th paragraph down, they say nerve block. They meant nerve block. And so there's a whole series of medications, and I think OHIP, in their understandable desire to cut costs, may have maybe taking things out of the realm that's good for people, and so I would support requesting a motion come forward to County Council that OHIP not delist some of the medications that are currently there. Thank you.
Okay, I would invite comment from you, Mr. Kelly. So, Warden Emo, are you suggesting that you would like to introduce a motion today to recommend this, or are you inviting staff perhaps to develop a resolution to support this, just so that I have clarity? Because if this committee should be recommending that to County Council, then there should be a motion and a seconder, et cetera.
Okay, so my motion would be that the staff proceed with an affirmative motion in line with the correspondence, which asks OHIP not to delist nerve blockers and other medication that relieve pain.
Okay, so Ms. Hill, do you have the gist of the resolution that Warden Emo is moving? Okay, could I have a second? Councillor Lafreniere is prepared to second that. Discussion. Councillor Lafreniere.
Me, but there. Yeah, so there's been several things that have happened, this opioid crisis, in a knee-jerk reaction to reduce the opiates that are in our community, and one of them is, such as what we're going to try to speak against, is reducing the availability of some medications to people that really do need it and that are not abusing it. Further to the incidents that we're discussing today, I know that if someone has previously been on morphine or anything of that nature, or any opiate, and was not an addict, was taking it responsibly in that, they cannot get it through VTAC. They have to go to the hospital and sit for a few hours, maybe every couple of weeks. So I'm just saying that that is why I support this. I think that because of the opiate crisis, rather than setting up more mental health facilities, more addiction treatment, this is a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, we'll reduce the availability of a lot of these drugs, which to me is not the answer. So that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment? I just have a question. So, Warden Emo, your resolution was specific to the OHIP. There are two paragraphs within the letter from the National Chronic Pain Society. And paragraph 4 is with respect to OHIP proposing to reduce coverage. But there is in the third paragraph that the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons has made a decision, if I'm reading this correctly, it is going to require ultrasound, I'm assuming in assuring the appropriate and accurate placement of the nerve blockers. It goes on to say that this would be in community pain clinics, but that this is not required, such as in epidurals in hospitals. So I'm wondering, is the resolution specific only to OHIP as opposed to the recommendation or the decision, I guess, of the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons?
It was only specific to it because that's the personal knowledge I have, and actually the knowledge has also been gleaned in my other life over the last 40 years of working with clients in the community. But that was the only thing I was focusing on, because the other issues I wasn't aware of until I read and hadn't had time to take a look at it.
Okay, and the reason that I'm asking that specifically is I certainly would be in support of OHIP not reducing the coverage, but I am loath, in most instances, without a whole lot more background information. It seems to me that the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons is the body that was tasked with making these decisions, and I am loath, on principle, to take a position in opposition to what their decision has been, whether it is this or whether it is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. I am not given towards questioning what we task them to do without having a whole lot more information to suggest that they made improper decisions. However, that it is contained only to OHIP continuing coverage, then I would certainly continue to support. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. I just suggest we've done some personal research into these two items that they're proposing in this letter, And if staff is going to come back with some information, I'd like them to include Ministry of Health's position on these two items, because they provide some additional context that we would need to consider in order to either support or not support this proposal.
So I'm certainly sensitive to your discussion points, Councillor Nicholson. But again, if that is what we're tasking staff with doing, then it would be incumbent upon staff to also identify, is this specifically what the province has delegated to the Ontario College? In which case, then, presumably, the Ministry of Health is subject to the decision of the Ontario College. And I'll repeat what I'd said, is if that is within the bailiwick, within the purview of the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons, then I'm not given to second guessing the decision that they would be making. So the resolution before us is only with respect to OHIP continuing to cover this. Staff can certainly investigate the matters that you have brought forward, Councillor Nicholson, but they're not. The second one is not germane to the resolution that is before us. Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, no, completely understood. So I just know there is additional information. This is only one position based on the resolution with respect to OHIP. So it'd be good to have both arguments in order to make a decision, a proposed decision.
Okay, and not to pick nits, but the resolution that's going to be going forward to council from here, the resolution that's before us for consideration, is specifically to OHIP. That is the one that will be recommended to council. So even if there is information presented then, unless there is an amendment proposed at county council, and keeping in mind, and I would poll Mr. Kelly, I'm assuming county council is 2 weeks from today. So is there room in your agenda to be able to facilitate that information gathering for the June council meeting?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. So we'll do our best to draft a resolution and try to bring somewhere in a whereas statement some of the background as well, as much as we can determine. And obviously they've left a contact coordinates here that we can follow up with and try to find as much information prior to next Thursday, the report going out to County Council.
Correct, yes. It's not 2 weeks from today. It is essentially a week from tomorrow when the package would be expected to be delivered. Anyway, thank you for that, Councillor Nicholson, and staff have made note. Anything further? So once again, the resolution before us is that a recommendation that council correspond with OHIP to continue coverage for pain blocking. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Could I have a motion to adopt the administration report, please? Councillor Murphy, Warden Emo. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. With that, I would invite Chief Nolan to take us through the emergency services report, if you please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to members of committee. I'll start with item number 1 on today's agenda. And in years past, this has been a huge piece of work and celebration, in fact, as a paramedic service, because it is the equivalent to, in principle, the equivalent to the accreditation in long-term care that you may be well familiar with. And this is the province's mechanism by which they typically would come and look at the paramedic service, go through our policies, and make sure that we meet all of the requirements of the Ambulance Act to continue to deliver service. There was a pivot during the pandemic so that this was more of a virtual experience for us, and one that involved considerable amount of work by my senior team to be able to pull together the documents to fulfill all of the requirements. But I'm happy to say that since the fall of 2022, when we experienced this process, the province has now confirmed that we have successfully completed the Land Ambulance Service Review, demonstrating compliance with the Land Ambulance Certification Standards, and has issued a 3-year certificate. So it may be a paragraph in a report, but this was months of work by my team, and in fact, what it represents is really an ongoing commitment in terms of the level of care that we're providing to the community and the administrative components that go into ensuring that that care is consistent and the services that we're providing are of the highest quality. So very grateful of that, and Dave and his team led that work. So a big thank you to them for attaining this certificate to operate. Item number 2, Mr. Chair, related to honors. And since Brian's retirement, he was recognized by Cheryl Gallant's office with a parliamentary certificate for his 33 years of service, and as well was provided with a Platinum Jubilee pin in honor of the Queen Elizabeth II's 70th anniversary to her accession to the throne. So really happy for Brian in that regard, and spoke with him yesterday, and the update is he's doing great and loving the time with his family, and his wife was cooking him breakfast at the time, so I think he's a pretty happy guy these days. Item number 3 related to the medical priority dispatch system, and you'll see within your package today there is also a messenger, it's called, by the province, related to the implementation of the MPDS system. So what's important for you to understand about the medical priority dispatch system is that it's a new way of doing business within provincially owned and operated central ambulance communication centers. So in Renfrew, we have a provincially run dispatch center. So there are administrative staff as well as call takers and dispatchers who you would speak to if you were to call 911 and ask for paramedic services, and as well fire services on contract to the County of Renfrew on behalf of the local municipalities as well. What's different about this system is that it truly is the international standard of call taking and dispatching within most mature systems in the world. Ontario began its implementation in the Mississauga Central Ambulance Communications Centre during the pandemic. Is most recently now in the Thunder Bay, Kenora area implementing the MPDS system. And we were fortunate enough to have risen to be the next highest priority area for implementation of the MPDS system in Ontario. So ourselves and the Ottawa ambulance communication centers will be, and have already begun the process, as you've probably read in the messenger, we've begun the process of implementing and creating the architecture for the software and the practices, more importantly, to be implemented across Renfrew County with our partners in Nipissing District in the Whitney corridor. But also by doing a simultaneous implementation with the City of Ottawa, it allows us to align where our dispatch priorities are, and as well what criterion equal what type of response. So you may remember the term Code 4, and that's a lights and siren call. Code 4 means a lot of things, and we know, especially from the Rubenstein report, which is later in my presentation to you, that there's a high overcall rate. There's a higher likelihood that we're going to be going lights and sirens than the people who need that level of response because of the antiquated dispatch software that the province had been using. AMPDS allows us as a paramedic service to sit down with the province and decide, for example, which types of 911 calls will obligate what level of response. And I think that that's critically important because we have lots of experience and now we have lots of evidence to be able to inform that decision, to be able to better rationalize the level of response. Of course, we don't want paramedics going lights and sirens down the middle of the highway if they don't need to. The current Code 4 model obligates us to do that in a disproportionate amount, and I think it's about 2/3 higher rate than we need to. Now, we know that based on the information we get over the phone, that the dispatchers appropriately often err on the side of caution to be able to provide the highest level of response to people who may need it. The evidence would suggest that there's different ways of looking at that, and the software in AMPDS allows the dispatcher and the call takers to use that information to better inform the level of response to the types of calls that come into dispatch, which allows us to better rationalize the utilization of our resources. Because once we decide something's a lights and sirens emergency, that means that that unit is dedicated to that call and can't be used for even a cardiac arrest on the way there. Right? They're dedicated in that first come, first serve model. They're then dedicated to that original call. That's extremely problematic for us currently because if the Renfrew paramedics are asked to go to the Rideau Centre, lights and sirens in Ottawa, because Ottawa's at level 0, that means that all of the other Code 4 calls that might come in between Renfrew and the Rideau Centre, we cannot be diverted to until another unit is assigned closer to that Rideau Centre call, for example. And that's not a hypothetical situation. So when we think about that in terms of serving ourselves, it gives us greater flexibility and should give us better reliability in terms of how we're using the resources. And it's also good from a paramedic perspective because they don't want to be, hurry up and wait on calls when it's pretty obvious at the outset that it doesn't obligate a lights and sirens response. So that can be quite diminishing in terms of how they're responding, when they're responding, and the way that we're using the resources. It also has a knock-on effect in that AMPDS will now allow us to be able to sit down and select determinants as to when and if we're going to be responding into other municipalities. So we know that we have an outstanding issue between municipalities, not just ourselves, but there's an outstanding issue that says that all code 4s, the closest paramedics will go. This is how we end up getting tied into doing a Renfrew to the Rideau Centre, for example, because if Ottawa's at level 0 and our closest available resource is in Arnprior or Renfrew, then we may be obligated in doing that sort of long bomb, if you use a football term, that very long call, and quite reliably will get canceled off because Ottawa or some other municipality has a resource closer than us. Imagine responding from Renfrew County to downtown Ottawa. The problem is that segment from when we receive the call to when we get canceled off the call, let's say it's in Stittsville, on our way down the Queensway, we've not been available to our own community or any other patient because we've been dedicated to that original call. So this has an impact potentially on the conversations around intermunicipal billing, because right now there's a disproportionately high overcall rate as to what's an emergency, and all emergencies are obligated to the local paramedic service. So our partners in Prescott Russell, Lanark, Leeds, Grenville, Cornwall, STG are all experiencing the same thing, but to different proportions. But we know that by changing the root cause, which is the language that obligates us to do the call in the first place, we should be able to have greater specificity and sensitivity in terms of which patients actually require a paramedic at that level of care at that time to be able to service that call, which should reduce our exposure in terms of having to do those calls in other municipalities, because we can get very fine with when we are going to do a lights and sirens response and to which patients specifically in which circumstances specifically. So just want to make sure you all follow that, because that is what then drives partially the need for an intermunicipal billing agreement, because if I'm doing hypothetically 1,000 calls for Ottawa and they're doing 200 for me, today under the current rules, again, those are hypothetical numbers just to be illustrative, but I'm able to say I'm only going to do these calls at a lights and sirens level for Ottawa, and Ottawa says the same thing for us. We should be getting that down to maybe 10 and 8 calls for one another if you use the Rubenstein math that we're going to present to you today in terms of the overcall rate and being able to get it very granular in terms of which patients will we be obligated to be able to serve. And I think we could all agree that we don't want to drive by someone's house when they're in cardiac arrest. But at the same time, I don't want our paramedics going from our Renfrew to Woodruff and Baseline or the Rideau Centre, especially if we expect that they're going to get canceled halfway there. That's not good for the patient, because it's distracted from the initial response. And in fact, it's not even good for Ottawa, because they don't have a sense of ownership of those patients when they fully expect that we're going to be obligated under provincial policy, not Ottawa's policy. So that's the context of why MPDS is so important. It's also the context of our priority in this process. And it would be my hope and desire that the Kingston CAC, which services Lanark and Leeds and Grenville, can be as high a priority as Renfrew and Ottawa in the provincial rollout, so that we don't have seam issues in that Pakenham, for example, isn't under a different dispatch software with different rules than our partners in Ottawa, because that might mean an over-obligation for us into Lanark or Lanark into us if that dispatch system that services Lanark, Leeds, Grenville, all the way through to Hastings County is on a different software than Ottawa, Renfrew County, meaning from Prescott Russell on through to Whitney. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that after, Mr. Chair, but I just want to give it the context and the importance of being on the priority list for implementation. Item number, where am I at here? 4 is the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada Excellence Award. So the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada Excellence Award is being presented actually today in Kelowna, BC. JD Heffron, who is one of our commanders, is receiving the award on our behalf so that we could all be here at committee today. And he'll be receiving the award from the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada for excellence as it relates to the Renfrew County Virtual Triage and Assessment Center and the paramedic involvement in our assessment clinics. And we did receive endorsement, of course, from the Ottawa Valley and Ottawa West for Rivers health teams as it relates to the priority population. So we're very pleased to receive this National Award of Excellence by the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada for that program. Item number 5, Mr. Chair, is the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. Partial refresh of the 2019 Paramedic Service Situation Report, and that, I believe, is on page number 9 of today's report. And I appreciate that it was a bit of a long read probably for you, but I think an incredibly insightful one. The warden and the CAO commissioned this report with their peers at the OWC, and this was a refresh from a document that Mr. Rubenstein had originally done, again in collaboration with the paramedic services and municipalities, to have a deep dive to truly understand the current status of paramedic services across Eastern Ontario, with the exception of Ottawa. They're not in scope as they're not part of the OWC, and to understand really what the future opportunities and pressures may be that we're experiencing. And I think, you know, as a municipality, you can hear from me, you can understand our paramedic service, but to understand how it compares to other paramedic services in a positive way, but also understand that we have a number of shared pressures and opportunities. And when I read today's report, I'm not seeing a huge variation in the paramedic services or what their pressures or opportunities are. I'm actually seeing quite a bit of cohesion and similar problems, similar challenges. And one of the real opportunities in that is because of the strength of our Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus and the collegial nature of that group to collaborate on provincial and municipal priorities, as well as the CAO's group. The Eastern Ontario paramedic chiefs are similarly collaborative in their approach. We meet, we're a very high functioning group to be able to carry out the work of the OWC, but also be able to ensure that we're able to learn from one another and be able to deliver similar high quality programs at a similar cost point, knowing that we have similar demographic issues. And in some ways, not having Ottawa in the report is helpful, because when we think about the rural caucus versus the urban experience, their demographics are different, their population health has a different nature, and geographically they also have different opportunities and challenges. So comparing ourselves to truly our brother and sister paramedic services is very helpful, because it is in many respects an apple-to-apple comparison. Some may have higher population, lower geography, and vice versa. We know that we have, you know, amongst the highest geographical area with a pretty stable population, so it allows us to be able to, I think, very easily identify how we compare to others who may have twice the population and half the size, and see where the obvious advantages to cost are, for example, in that regard, where you're not doing millions of kilometers on your fleet on an annual basis, or have the geographic spread of the base stations that we require in Renfrew County. So when we look at the report on page 9, there is an overview of the hospital offload related issues, community paramedic programs requiring provincial commitment for permanent funding and predictable funding, the dispatch system needing to be modernized and ensure the deployment of appropriate 911 resources. And I can say that the support of the EOWC for many years, from Warden Eamon's time to past Warden Murphy's time, and others, has been the stage by which we've been able to be prioritized with the AMPDS rollout. So really number 3 is in part what I'm speaking of from an AMPDS perspective. Really the opportunity there is to get the rest of the EOWC high on the list so that we can have a seamless and coordinated response using modernized software. And then item number 4 related to community college paramedic enrollment needing to be increased. And I think the health human resource sector across Ontario is certainly feeling the burden of burnout as well as shortage overall in terms of providers. And really what item number 4 speaks to is a move to go from a 2-year to a 3-year community college program. As the Vice President of the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs, I've been able to work directly with the community college leadership and they have assured us that the addition of a 1 year to the community college program is not a gap year. In fact, it's an extra year, which will give us an additional year of graduation by running parallel programs, because our concern in supporting that move was that it was going to create a gap. In fact, they're able to add a saddle, if you will, so that you'll have an extra year bumped in there at the 3-year mark. So it's actually quite potentially quite good news for us in the sector. And Curtis Farrell, who's not sitting with us here today, is one of the leadership voices at the universities and colleges of Ontario, as in his role at Algonquin College, and he has been one of the leads to ensure that there will not be a gap year. In fact, that it'll be an additional year of cohort. So very pleased with that. When we look to the report overall, there's a couple of areas of highlight, and I'd rather leave more time for questions and comments, Mr. Chair, than to go through the report in detail. But I think when we think about the relationship between paramedicine and community paramedicine, we think about the pressures related to aging of our population, the pressures related to offload delay, and as well the modernization of the dispatch system. These pressures are not isolated to the paramedic service within the health sector, but they are certainly opportunities for us to collaborate, to advocate, which the EOWC does an exceptional job at. And also to work with the hospital sector so as not to tie up our resources unnecessarily in offload delay. We have done some innovative programs working with our hospital partners, namely Pembroke Hospital and Armpire Hospital, by having paramedics supporting by being staffed at 100% hospital cost, so that we can have paramedics in triage and in the department supporting that transfer of care. We've also recently made application to the province for offload funding, which was not previously eligible to rural communities. So that is specifically targeted towards the Renfrew Hospital and Pembroke Hospital, which meet the threshold of eligibility for a number of patients and offload delay pressures. So we hope that that can also assist in some of the challenges that are being presented here today. When we look at the overall service coverage areas and facilities issues, we are in line with our peers in terms of recognizing where the opportunities exist, but we also know that from a facilities and fleet perspective, we have significant challenges related to distance and mileage. With fuel costs being what they are, and vehicle costs and wear and tear, we know that we run on the high side, and exceptionally the high side in terms of mileage and pressures on the fleet. So when we think about what that represents for us, certainly reducing our interfacility transfers is an ongoing priority for us, but also our partnership with Public Works is an invaluable one, knowing that we have Glenn Villeneuve working on our fleet, and he's the one who keeps the rubber on the road, quite literally, we've also innovated by having our on-site fuel in a partnership with Public Works, so that we have bulk discounts on diesel costs, for example, to be able to just make gains where we can, knowing that we're not going to shorten the distance between us and hospitals or us and people who call 911. But even by moving to a lighter fleet, by the addition of community paramedics and emergency response vehicles, can often allow those paramedics to respond and cancel the responding ambulance. So the modernization and the models of care work that where we're trying to treat people at home and leave them at home, should go far actually in terms of us reducing our overall mileage and pressures on the transport ambulance fleet, in favor of keeping people at home and not requiring that subsequent transport either to hospital or potentially even to hospitals in the city, where we tend to pile on a lot of mileage because each of our 5 hospitals do send a significant number of patients, albeit less than years previous, down to those tertiary care centers for further diagnostics. I'm also happy to see that the Armpire Hospital will be bringing on a CT scanner, and something like those types of local initiatives allow us to be able to keep our patients in community and be able to support them in a way that we've not been able to previously do. The addition of MRI machines, telemedicine, and of course VTAC is a significant benefit to being able to reduce the burden on 911 and hospitalization, but it also has a downstream effect on reducing the need for patients to call 911, be transported by paramedics, and then those pressures on our fleet and on our overall staffing should be able to stabilize. as we've been able to achieve, as Mr. Rubenstein points out, with the utilization of community paramedics, by being able to achieve quite modest results in reduction in 911 calls, as he points out within the report. The last thing that I'm going to speak to is related to the overall cost within the report, Mr. Chair, and that is there's a regression and analysis within today's report on page 53. And when you look at the 5-year predictive forecasts, I think it's important to consider all of the information that's gone into this and the consultation with the CAOs, the wardens, and the paramedic services themselves. But Mr. Rubenstein has taken a look at the data. And the data is unbiased, if you will, forecasting shows that when we look at response volumes on page 53, there's a significant reduction, somewhere between 5.2 and 10.3% increase to call volume per year. And for those of you that were here almost 20 years ago when I came here, we started sounding the alarm 20 years ago to say the age of the population is going to be the greatest single determinant in terms of utilization of healthcare and utilization of paramedic service. So while our population is not growing in leaps and bounds, the age of our population is outstripping the increase in population numbers themselves. And Mr. Rubenstein does speak to that within the report. So when we think about what that represents in terms of costs overall, there are significant pressures that are facing paramedic services, and as we spoke about at the last round of budget. But when we look at page 59 within the report, you can see that there are estimates in terms of additional annual spending to be able to keep up to the volumes and the pressures predominantly associated with aging. In some municipalities, there's a greater impact of offload delay and reduction in utilization, but we're looking at a minimum of a $2.6 million annual spend to be able to maintain the quality or level of care that we're currently providing on an ongoing basis going forward. And I think that that's critically important because that is disproportionate, that is a pressure, that requires advocacy from the EOWC to the province to make sure that they're picking up their portion of that spend, but it also creates pressures on us as a paramedic service, but also on my boss and all of you when we come to budget to be able to share these realities that are occurring within the sector, and these realities are occurring across the health sector, where age has a significant I don't even like the word burden, but pressure associated with a certain part of the sector. It also has a knock-on effect, for example, to my friends in long-term care. With the advanced age in population, so too does the wait list for long-term care continue to rise, so too does the complexity of the care that our partners in long-term care have to provide. So it's not isolated to paramedic services, but Mr. Rubenstein does a good job in terms of looking at spending, in terms of attaining or reattaining a unit hour utilization to keep it in a reasonable range from a staffing perspective, but more importantly, so that the public can continue to rely upon the level of service they're currently receiving, knowing that there are pressures that have not snuck up on us. These pressures have been kind of ever present, but as we tick the majority of the population, I used to have a age demographic population curve of the baby boomers, for example. So as every year continues to progress and the significant bulk of the population continues to be in that range, that is the population that has a disproportionately high utilization of paramedic services. So when that population was 40 years old, they had a very low utilization of the health service. When that population is 80 years old, it's exponentially higher than when they were 40 years old. And that population now is creeping through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that's the population that we have to keep an eye on. And that's not even to recognize the fact that the population is living longer than it has as well. So it's not unusual for us to get a call for somebody who's over 100 years old in Renfrew County. That's to be celebrated. Those are the population that we need to make sure that we're still there to help them and serve them in their quality of life with advanced age. But to be 102 or 103 or 105 years old no longer means that you're bedridden and no longer means that the system has given up on you or you've given up on the system. It actually means that as people continue to live well into their 80s and 90s, companies, that we need to be able to ensure that we're there to support them as they do that, and there is a cost associated with that Mr. Rubenstein has articulated. I think that's that for that one, Mr. Chair, but I hopefully was able to provide enough context to a lengthy report without, I guess I got into it pretty deep there, but suffice to say, it's an excellent report that is going to help guide us as a paramedic service, and I think guide the conversation with the province for the UWC. Is that fair? Sorry,
Thank you.
I didn't feel the hook in my side there. So.
No, thank you. Well, and the hand sanitizer is still to my right. That is the last of the information items. So before we get into the resolutions, I want to review information items. So committee, taking back to page 4, information item number 1, the County of Renfrew certification. Any questions, comments? Very pleased that we remain in business. Actually, congratulations once again on 3-year certification. Item number 2, the honors bestowed upon Deputy Chief Retired Brian Leahy. Any questions, comments? My commendations again to Deputy Chief Leahy. Hope he enjoys his retirement, and be careful of the flying. Item 3, the medical priority dispatch system. Councillor Murphy, then Councillor Frenier, then I have Warden Emo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure where to put this because I feel like 3 and 5 are speaking to the challenges. So I'm going to ask the question because it would be the same for both. Chief, we cannot be the only rural area in Ontario or even Canada that has these problems. Do you know of any solutions that, say, rural areas around London might have, or rural areas around Sudbury might have? Like, we can't be the only ones with a urban area situated right in the middle of our 13 mostly rural Eastern Ontario Warden's Caucus members. I'm just wondering, do they have any solutions that we could look at either through dispatch or with this very comprehensive report that was given to the caucus? I mean, it was a long read, but it was a very interesting read. Thank you.
Chief Nolan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to be brief, Chief Roberts in London, for example, has been one of the champions of the AMPDS system. And as a past president of the OAPC, has done an excellent job of raising it as a pressure to the province to be able to provide us a better technology so that we can better rationalize the service we provide. I think Mr. Rubenstein has identified most of the areas of opportunity that are obvious, certainly in the Ontario context. When we look at AMPDS, it represents a huge opportunity for us to do our business differently. It means that the people who are going to need us the most, we should have greater availability to serve them. The people who don't need us as urgently should have better options to be able to access the healthcare system. So to be able to send a community paramedic instead of an ambulance is a significant opportunity for us to be able to better support the population, especially if those community paramedics or those responding 911 paramedics have the ability to treat someone and keep them at home safely. The rules have been prohibitive previously in Ontario to do that. Other jurisdictions, such as the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, have been doing that for years. So in many respects, Ontario is a laggard from a policy perspective. It has a broken Ambulance Act, which is restrictive and really it keeps us in the 1970s. So with the advancement of the software in dispatch, which has been operating in many other countries since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, really it's about time, as is kind of my cynical side would say. But now that it's here, let's make the most of it. When we look at modernization of the policies related to treat and release and keeping people at home, I think it's critically important that we hurry up with that, and that Ontario is not risk adverse to the point of putting greater risk on the people who have not already called 911 than being able to support people to be able to make good decisions in terms of their own care. The existing model is essentially the paramedic's requirement to say to you, look, you've called 911, I have to tell you, you need to go to the hospital, right? That does not make sense when it comes to patients being educated and making good choices for themselves, to be able to choose to stay home, be able to use the services of paramedics, but also to be able to use services such as VTAC, to be able to augment that care once the paramedics have evaluated them and provided them good choices in terms of the next step, not try and scare them into going to the hospital. That's the way the system's been constructed. And then lastly, I think there's still opportunities for us as paramedic services to collaborate with our partners within the EOWC, where there are opportunities to do bulk purchasing, for example, where there are opportunities to collaborate on pharmaceuticals. But we do an exceptional job already of collaborating and sharing information. I think we can get a little bit more operational in how closely we work together in that regard. And maybe a little less close as to how often we send ambulances into other municipalities and they have to service us because the root cause of the dispatch system is broken. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Frenier.
Is Ottawa going to be going on board with the MPDS system at the same time we are?
Chief.
Or are they already on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Councillor Lafreniere. They are not already on it. They are in a parallel planning process to ourselves with the implementation timeline. I believe within a month of one another, we'll be going live. And in doing that, it allows us in the planning phase to actually use consistent language and consistent practices so that when we come out the other end, while we have two different dispatch centers, I'd love for it to be as consistent as possible in its application. And there's lots of appetite by Ottawa and by ourselves to do that. So I'm quite encouraged by that.
Great.
The
Yeah.
third leg of that stool is Lanark, who is dispatched by Kingston, and they are not currently on the priority list. For some reason, they fell off the priority list. The OWC is aware of that, and we need them to be, essentially on that same timeline with us, so as to avoid potentially catastrophic issues between software dispatch centers and paramedic services.
And not to say that if Ottawa's running more efficiently, and as you described, not sending an ambulance where it isn't needed, then maybe their call for service in our region would reduce as well.
Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Warden Emo, please.
Thank you. So with regard to the system, the MPDS system, so what we've done is you'll see a letter, but we've already started the conversation with our four partners. I've had initiated conversation with the City of Ottawa with Riley Brockington, who is the councillor who chairs their paramedic and emergency response. I've also spoken to the mayor, and we're setting up a time to have a more detailed conversation. We've had some conversation with Kingston as well, because it was very, very correctly pointed out on the front end that if Kingston is not involved, then it severs some of our, or strains some of our relationships with our paramedic services within Eastern Ontario, because essentially the line stops there, and to the west is a different system. So we're aware of that, and we will be responding to it as the Wardens Caucus in the next little while. But we know there's a certain amount of political suasion that's going to be needed, and Mayor Sutcliffe sits at the Big Cities Caucus, and Mayor Patterson sits at the Urban Caucus at AMO. So the initial conversations there, I'm just in the process of getting the more information. We have a letter that we're sending out as well to Ottawa to talk about how we can work with them. So Ottawa, to their credit, have shared their staff reports with me, which prior to their meetings, so that I'm able to look at them and know where they're going. We're sharing information with them. So there is a new relationship, I think, that we can build politically, and I think operationally, the paramedic services get along really well, which is usually what happens is the front line leads the way, and the back office, which is us, follows along and grudgingly forms relationships. So it's not grudging in this sense. Both mayors are interested in making things work. So we're going to keep doing that. And I think we don't quite have a common step forward on cross-border remuneration, but that's actually a much smaller issue when you take a look at the dispatch system and you take a look at the offload delays, where I think we have some common ground where we move forward. So I'll keep you appraised. It's developing quickly, and as fast as we can get you information, we will. But the Wardens Caucus is on it. The small group that's listed in the Leeds-Grenville letter that you received is on it as well. We met last week and put something forward. So we're trying to make this work. So we're very hopeful with this new dispatch system. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Weir, please.
Yes, through you, Chair, to Chief Nolan. We're talking about timelines and stuff. What timeline are we looking for possibility of this to go live?
Chief.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The provincial estimation right now is between March and May of next year, which seems like a reasonable timeline given the amount of work that we'll be doing collaboratively with our partners in dispatch.
Any further questions, comments? I have a few. Very pleased, actually, to see this finally rolling out. In fact, as I'm sitting listening to the discussion, I'm wondering if, in fact, at the rate, the pace of change that is being driven by AI, if by the time this is rolling out in a year hence, that we may simply, upon a 911 call coming in saying, ChatGPT, what shall I do with this one? Ultimately, this is a substantial leap forward in dispatch. And as Councillor Murphy had noted, I think it's on page 20 of today's report. It is from the Rubenstein report. It talks about, I think, something in the order of 70% of calls by the caller are perceived to be that, I don't know if code 4, but certainly of an urgent requirement. And upon presentation of the paramedics, about 26% of the calls are, in fact, that. That is such an oversubscription of utilization of services. And I understand that the caller, I have been in that situation making those calls, and I perceive it to be that. So I think that this is a leap forward, not an incremental, not evolutionary. I think this is revolutionary, but I think that the pace of the revolution may actually be picking up speed going forward. So very pleased to see that. We are going to, in terms of Warden Emo's comments, we are going to be re-engaging, I think, on that discussion in new business. There was just this morning received a piece of correspondence that I will be bringing forward in new business that I think dovetails along with this as well. But I think from an overview perspective, it would kind of like be if half of the fire department showed up to rescue the cat off of the top of the transformer. And that's where we're at now. Is the other thing that we're going to get there in a moment in the I call it the Rubenstein report that really jumped out at me as well was sorry, I've lost my train of thought actually. We'll get there in a moment, but it certainly was germane to this conversation. Anyway, very pleased to see this moving forward, and I'm certainly anxious that if it's a March to May, that it is the sooner the better, that we are making much more. Oh, that's what I was going to say is the utilization. We have mitigated against a whole lot of the pressures, probably from the time that Chief Nolan had said the 20-year period. A great deal of the mitigation has been the community paramedicine, as Rubenstein notes. We've seen an explosion in the Rubenstein report in terms of the offload delay, I think 250% or something like that. So we've done all that we can, and the importance is that this dispatch, like the Rubenstein report, is going to be predicated on data. And data is going to be driving these discussions forward, so that we're very careful to actually address the root issues and not simply be meeting or alleviating symptoms thereof. It seems that too often there is a palliative approach, which is, okay, well, we can't fix this thing, so we'll jerry-rig things to make it better, or we'll treat the symptoms thereof. What the data is going to do is it's going to allow us to address the root cause of these issues and make those changes and correct those things. So very pleased to see that. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could. Sorry, I thought I had the nod from you there. I'd be remiss in not recognizing the fact that as it pertains to the AMPDS report, The provincial dispatch system in Renfrew, the Renfrew Central Elements Communication System, is led by Ashley St. Marie. And we've often been critical of the province and dispatching, but never have we been critical of the individuals. Ashley St. Marie and her team are our neighbors. They are the people that rely on our system so much as administer our system. And I think really one of the things to celebrate is that by expediting the AMPDS program here in Renfrew County, we're giving them the tools that, in fact, they've always wanted to be able to use, and the policy support to be able to administer that program in a new way that allows them to do what they also know and have always wanted to be able to do. So any criticism as it relates to dispatch has never been about our dispatch administration under Ashley's leadership. It's entirely about the policies that are imposed upon them by the province and the technology that they've been given to work with. So we're moving from a Chevette to a Corvette, and this is a leap, as the chair would identify, but it's also something that we need to take a very cautious approach to getting it right the first time with them. So my team is spending a significant amount of time, my commanders especially, will be spending a significant amount of time writing all of those rules in collaboration with Ashley and her team, supported by the provincial table that's putting out the newsletter that's in today's report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think that I'm very pleased that you brought that forward. The issues are systemic, and the people that are working within the system that we currently inhabit are exemplary in responding to the needs of our community. It's the system itself that needs to change to meet our needs. Moving on then to item number 4, the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada Award of Excellence. Pardon me?
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to the chief.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up, because not only, as the chair says, the system is kind of broken, the people at dispatch are doing their absolute best. And I think what really could be a morale breaker are the stories that, they're fish stories, right? I caught a fish, it was this big. So, you're hearing, and Dave Libby and I talked about this last month, where one of the sitting county councillors said, oh, I had a resident that said it took them 10 minutes to get through to dispatch. And I think those stories are detrimental and hurtful to the system. And I suggested that the sitting member spoke to Mr. Libby and found out what the actual truth was. I know from the fire at our shop that, less than 3 minutes it took Renfrew Fire to get there, felt like an eternity. And so I think that we all need, if we're told that something like that by a resident, make sure that they actually caught a largemouth bass and not a guppy. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 4, the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada Award of Excellence. Once again, I think that this speaks volumes to how VTAC has so met the needs, responded to the needs of our community, and is reinforcing certainly the integral importance of VTAC here. So very pleased to have received this recognition. Item 5, the refresh on the 2019 Paramedic Services Review. Warden Emo, and then Councillor Lafreniere.
Thank you. Chair, through you to committee, I had seen this report last month, just before our Health Committee meeting, and I made reference to it, saying that it was going to be quite sobering for us. And so you can see that the Warden's Caucus has reacted very quickly to it by our what it's going to be our 4 priorities over the next 5 years. And just rambling through this very quickly, just some key points that jumped out at me when I was looking at it the first time around was the numbers about the value on page 18 of the community paramedicine program, the middle paragraph where it talks about all the visits and the savings of calls. And then again, I'll just take you through to page 25, where it talks about our population. The chief mentioned it earlier about our population growing. And if you look at 2.8, where it talks about in 2018, 23% of our population was considered seniors, with 55% of all paramedics calls. 2022, only 25% of the total population, and they generated 56%. And I'm not pointing a finger because I am a senior. And if we look at the 65 plus, we're expected to be 29% of our call volume in 2028. So those are the kinds of things, it's kind of the numbers that are quite sobering and drove us forward. And then when I take a look at the on page 31, where there's the paragraph on downstaffing, and then also the cost of the vehicles on the bottom paragraph. So those are just some of the highlights that I hope the public takes an opportunity to take a look at this as well. A vehicle used to be 150,000, now it's 200,000, and we've got delays, and with everything else, you can't, you have what you think is a solid commitment, and we're not sure we're going to get it even if we have a contract. And so I'll take you to page 37, and you look at the base costs, which are $187 million across the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. And then you take a look for that. That was a call volume of about 220,000 calls, which is up from 2018, which was 187,000 calls. So that's about a 21% increase. And then when you just moving along through the report, and these are just things just to highlight on, to take a look at. If you look at the offload delay on page 48, where the hours are 31,000 hours of offload delay. So the average offload delay in 2018 was 0.81 of an hour, and now it's 107. And so, there's a value attached to that $17 million. And it's not so much the money. Money bothers me, but it's the 31,000 hours, nearly 32,000 hours that our paramedics across Eastern Ontario are sitting still. That's the real pressure point for us. I'll gripe about money any day, but it's the downtime where they're not able to do that. And so you look at page 49, and it says that consumes the equivalent of 17.2 12-hour ambulance shifts every day. So that's the value that we're giving up to the healthcare system. That's lost time for us. And so that's where I mentioned talking to the City of Ottawa, and that's a pressure point for Ottawa. That's something that just really irks them, and I think we can go forward with them together for the first time in a long time on something. And then again, you just take a look at the 5-year forecast, and this was quite frightening for me when I looked at it. We look at page 53, the graph says we're 227 calls right now. We're expected to go to 408,000 calls in 2028. So when you go through further into the document, it talks about we're going to need across the community 65 additional 12-hour shifts. So that's real money. And then you push that, and is the offload delays going to get any better? So you're looking at 17 shifts a week already if the offload delays don't get any better on top of what's needed. So those are the kinds of things that I just wanted to point out, and that we're going to be wrestling with. But I think if you can insert some of these talking points and information to your councils and in smaller batches, and then also we're going to be speaking to MPs and MPPs, and if you happen to bump into somebody at AMO and Roma and any other conferences, mention this information. So if you have a little, I'm just saying that it's not a crisis. It's a long-term strain that if we don't address, will break our system. And so we're very aware of that, and we're going to be quite aggressive in pushing out this messaging across the Wardens Caucus. And the councillor from Bone Shore Valley, a member from Bone Shore Valley, mentioned, is the province aware of this in other areas? I've started to share this with some of our neighbors, our information, not our neighbors, but across the province, and they're going to send some information back as well, so we might have some comparative. But for the most part, we're on the front end of documenting this and getting it compiled. So, kudos to the Wardens Caucus in the past and to our own service about focusing on research and numbers and not gut feel and anger and frustration. So by generating numbers and research, we proved the value of community paramedicine, but we're also now in the process of proving where the system has limits and how it limits our ability to serve our community. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Frenier, please.
Quite an extensive read, a lot of information. You know, when you're reading through it and you're looking at our region compared to all the others that are listed, you know, we're at the highest. We spend a lot of money compared to some other municipalities, but I mean, that's money well spent. We also have more vehicles, more staff, when you look at all those. However, what's really struck me was performance results. And I think that there's some things not taken into account when they're grading us there is the size of our county, and I believe that's probably the effect, because our results were 60% where others were 99, and so I'm saying we're spending a lot of money, but we're still a large county, so we're being graded or rated with that to our detriment. But I mean, I think this is a great report, so you can pull out of it what you need to for different reasons. And I mean, hopefully this new system that's coming in, the MPDS, is going to improve having those vehicles dispatched to the further parts of our region. So no, a good read, a lot of information there to absorb, but thank you.
Thank you. Warden Emo, back to you.
It's an emerging pressure point with the announcement last week of Ottawa hiring, I believe, expected to hire 130 new paramedics. One of the challenges for those of us that are closest to Ottawa is we have a rotating cast, I guess, of paramedics who work part-time for a number of our partners and ourselves. And so that may cause us some problems down the road. Now, Ottawa's rolling that out. They're not hiring them all August 1st. So that may, you know, it's kind of be careful what you wish for. We've said, hey, you've got to hire more paramedics. And so you know, that's something, again, they're willing to talk about. You know, it's another slight pressure point as we move towards an improved system.
Thank you, Warden. Actually, I think we might probably take that up a little bit again in the new business item when we get to there as well. What I will say at this point is the expectation is, I think, phased in over three. It is 120 phased in over 3 years, 40 per year for 3 years. What's quite novel about the report that I read, which seemed immediately rejected by a spokesperson for the Minister of Health, whereby on the initial 40, that of course the province shares 50-50, or what they approximate as 50-50, that 23 of the 40 positions would be under the 50-50, but Ottawa is proposing that 17 of them be funded fully by the province, and that one was shot just barely before it left the ground, I think, that balloon. But as I said, I think that we may take that up again at the item of new business. Anything further on this report? Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question on the so what of this report. I mean, we're seeing 5-year forecasts with these numbers. Is this an opportunity for us to now look at a 10-year forecast of how we're going to spend our tax dollars to increase our support so they're there when they're needed? Or is that something that's going to come at a different point?
Before, actually, I would invite, and this probably is more for the purview of the people facing the front than it is for the people facing the back. When I first read this, what I thought was, if the priorities that have been identified and discussed and advocated from this county in paramedic services and this refresh of the Rubenstein report are a Venn diagram, they're describing almost a complete circle, a perfect circle. Everything that is contained herein is what we've been saying. It has occurred to me, even when I'm reading the section on the increased expectation of more shifts. Council has this year, we have expanded, the first time the paramedic services expanded in the county of Renfrew, I think maybe in 20 years, 15 years at the very least. We had a very extensive, comprehensive discussion at that time of recognizing what I had indicated earlier. We have utilized every tool at our resource to continue to mitigate against this growing wave. And we have run out of room there of how we can mitigate. And now we are seeing this, and I will agree with Warden Emo's comments that it's not a crisis. But I would remind people as well that we've been talking about the tsunami of demographics that are coming. Typically, we've engaged in that with respect to long-term care. The thing that is of interest to note with tsunamis is they propagate downwards out in the middle of the ocean, but as they get nearer to shore, they don't have any down room to go. It is up. So that 60-foot wave might only be a meter in the middle of the ocean, but it's going to be 60 meters when it hits the shore. So it may not be crisis yet, but we're watching that 1 meter coming at us, and now is the time, and that's what this report does. I was not going to pull out anything in particular. I think that the entirety of the report is eye-opening. I am pleased that it is based on the numbers that we are seeing, and it is validating, as I had indicated, what we have been advocating, what the paramedic service and Chief Nolan have been bringing forward for quite a number of years now. And now is the time to begin to address that, and we are addressing that. The two items, offload delay and community paramedicine, you will recognize in here that they are discussed precisely that way of, were these to end tomorrow? Now that crisis is right in front of us. So these are the things that must be satisfied, but I think probably that is more of a political conversation, frankly, than it is from the management of the paramedic service. Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to your question, Councillor. What you've asked is very similar to what the CAO has asked of us, which is to get at the crystal ball, use the data, and see what a 5, 7, 10-year forecast looks like. The CAO has also worked with the Ontario Health teams because they have a similar interest in terms of the alignment of primary care and other elements of the health system, and they've also committed to supporting us in that effort. So we will be coming back, likely as part of the budget process, to try and lay out a longer range forecast, not only with the elements that Mr. Rubenstein has identified, but also what does it mean in very practical terms, in terms of our leaseholds, for example? What does it mean in terms of our health human resource strategy? What does it mean in terms of the expansion of 100% funded program in favor of doing that at a 50-50 cost share model? So where we can use 100-cent provincial dollars to expand our programs, so as not to put a pressure on the local tax levy by further expansion of the 50-50 program. It also allows us to be able to look at what our organizational model and organizational structure are in a way so that we can be ready to support these programs as the province seems to go through this crawl, walk, run approach of, here's a development program, here's a pilot program, and then here's a sustainable ongoing program. We need to be able to resource that at a leadership level, but also be able to have the human resources available to provide those services, as we are currently in our emergency department program, as well as the clinics for VTAC and all of the multitude now of community paramedic programs that the province is funding through different silos. So we are working at the provincial level to help guide that process so that we can move from that infancy of a program on through to the maturation of the program in a very timely way, so that we can solidify what we offer the public, and that can have, as Mr. Rubenstein has identified, a significant impact on those programs that are 50-50 funded by mitigating 911 calls before they ever happen.
Thank you, Chief. Mindful of that we're an hour and 15 minutes in, and we still have to get to resolutions of long-term care in a closed session. I will invite the final question from Councillor Lafreniere.
Just a follow-up. In this study, it indicates that home visits in the county were 27,300. Other municipalities, the highest number was 5,800. That's quite a difference between what we're doing here. Are any of those calls shared costs with the province, or are they all borne by the county?
Chief, I think this is a good news response.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll smile while I give it. So the good news is that those activities of the community paramedics are 100% funded by the province. And you'll note on one of the charts, which caught me a little bit off guard, where it was about how much funding does each municipality receive at 100% provincial dollars. And, I try and look for us to be in the middle of the pack on most of these things. We're among the highest recipients of 100% funding amongst our peer comparator group. And, that's because of Deputy Chief Grenier's work and the entire team, because we've been doing community paramedicine since about 2007. So it's the longest pilot program in the world by the seams of things. But I have pretty high confidence that now that every paramedic service in Ontario has community paramedic funding, and the Ministry of Long-Term Care just extended their community paramedic funding, that I think the province has caught on to the fact where it's enough of pilot programs, and we need to just do this in a more integrated way.
Well, I ended this topic on a positive note then. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And in fact, these are the community paramedicine evangelicals to my left. And things are looking very good from the pilot, so I'm hoping that good is going to come for that. Chief, back to you for the resolutions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So of the resolution and then the addendum as well, Mr. Chair, so let me know how you'd like me to work that through. Okay, so I will do the resolution and then I will pause for you to take it from there before I do the background. Yeah. So item number 6 is a recommendation that the Health Committee recommend to the Striking Committee that the Community Health Programs Advisory Committee be formed as an ad hoc to the Health Committee, consisting of representatives of different institutions and areas of relevance within the broader healthcare system, to offer their diverse, relevant, and extensive perspectives of healthcare leadership experience. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Could I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Weir, seconded by Warden Emo. Background, please, Chief.
As attached as Appendix ES4, the terms of reference for the Community Health Programs Advisory Committee. So the role of the Advisory Committee is to recommend and provide advice to the Health Committee on programs and services that the County of Renfrew offers or is engaged in, and that are most relevant to the changing landscape of healthcare, including new challenges being faced by leadership on the effective best practice of successful healthcare management. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions, comments, discussion? Warden Emo.
For me, I think it's the logical next step in the journey with VTAC. I think it's shown it's a community-based service, and I think there should be always, when you're involved in something, I'm a big fan of you get to say because you pay, and so we're part of paying, so I think we need some say and I think some guidance. And at the same time, I think governance is important, as well as communication with the rest of the service community. When you see the structure of the committee, it brings in other areas of expertise, other experiences, and that's going to be important to maintain VTAC as an essential service as part of our healthcare, but also for future development, because the municipal sector and the provincial sector doesn't do as well as it could when it's with services. We tend to, if they need 6%, we give them 1%. So if we're going to kill them, just cut their throat. Don't let them starve to death slowly over 6 or 10 years. And so if we don't develop the service, at some point it'll atrophy. So I think it's important to have a vision statement and a 5-year plan and a strategic plan, and you can only accomplish that by having a board or an advisory group that guides it. So I'm very, very positive about this, and I think it's the next logical step. And again, I think it sets an example for how you develop something initially, how you manage it, and then how you exploit it. And I know that's a terrible word, exploit, but this is a positive word. We have to exploit the benefits of VTAC.
Perhaps fully utilize or utilize to its maximum as opposed to exploit. Just before Councillor Frenier, just a comment on the warden's remarks. I think that everybody in the room may recall, certainly those who were present, at the time of the devolution of the LHINs, the local health integration networks, towards the new model of OHTs. The County of Renfrew was adamant that there was a role for the county within that. So similar to what Ward Nemo has suggested, I think that it is modeling precisely what we were advocating at that time, that it is important that there be the silo walls continue to be removed, and there continues to be engagement across the sector and recognizing the value that is added and brought to this. If I'm understanding, that essentially there's been a working group that has, from a staff level, been particularly or had a particular utility as we've been advancing on our community paramedicine, in particular perhaps with VTAC. But as I understand it, one of the drivers of this is where this was essentially funded through, or at least the banker for this, as we are the banker for the OHT, Arnprior Regional Hospital was the banker for VTAC, the County of Renfrew is now. So I think that it is important that there continues to be that same facility, that across the sector there is opportunity for input towards the continuing development of this. So I'm very pleased to see this being brought forward. Councillor Lafreniere.
I support this fully. I think it's great. I just have a question. When you say different institutions and areas of relevance, would that include representatives that work in the mental health and addiction sector, that type of thing? Because, you know, for many years, physical health and mental health were separated, and I really want to see the evolution continue where we're merging the two and not separating them, treating them equally.
I will note within one of the white bullet points, under the fourth black bullet point, second from the bottom, mental health is not defined specifically as where that representative would be drawn from, but mental health is certainly one of the lists to have a seat at the table.
Thank you. And further to that, I just wanted to ask if in the future, if statistics related to mental health and addiction from the paramedics service point could be start to evolve. I don't know if you keep separate stats, but I really think it would be educational for everyone to see what percentage of the workload for paramedics and that type of thing, or calls for service, are related to mental health and addiction.
If I might, and I'm not sure, Chief or Mr. Kelly, you know, if you've gone that far into the extrapolation of what this would be, it seems to me that this is a very good foundation that is also not limiting, and I would be probably cautious about identifying individual particular things. I think that is ultimately what the advisory group would engage in as it pertains to the services that the community paramedicine, that's probably almost more of an Ontario Health Team discussion per se. Chief, you wish to augment that?
Yeah, just to expand upon it, I think and often I think the question from Councillor Lafreniere is an important one from the perspective of what do we do with the information, right? And so the 24-hour mental health crisis line in Renfrew County was encouraged, I wanted to say born out of, but I think that's probably overstating it, but was created during the pandemic based upon the involvement of the mental health specialists that sat at our VTAC working group. And when we identified the number of mental health related calls that were coming through the VTAC line, that helped with the use case for the mental health crisis services that's 24 hours available in Renfrew County. And at the same time, that also supports the involvement of the OPP and social worker program that does provide services within certain hours of the day and associated with that. So I agree with the chair in terms of what do we do with the granularity of the report. I think more importantly, what do we do with the information, and then how do we support not only the proliferation of those services, but also how do we inform our practice within the paramedic service and how do we create programs so as to give people direct access to the services they need most.
Thank
So
you.
that's why we have, as the chair rightly points out, a mental health representative sitting at this table.
Good, because you're right, it provides validity for anyone advocating for the province to increase services in our community. And those are the frontline challenges that leadership, I know in Pembroke, is facing right now. The county, maybe in urban areas, isn't hearing it as much, but that's because those individuals suffering from those afflictions come to Pembroke.
Right.
So that is why I think it is important to collect this data, so that we need it to fight for more services that's going to be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to point out, and it hasn't been asked, but there's reference in the membership about the Petawawa Family Health Team. And for those wondering perhaps why they're included, part of our funding of $3+ million that we got from the province for VTAC was the rollout of the IVC, or the Integrated Virtual Care. So the Petawawa Family Health Team has been working for, oh gosh, several months, almost a year, I guess, or so, on attaching unattached patients to virtual docs, if you will. So that the amount, you recall, it said VTAC and IVC. So they will be our partners going forward on the whole virtual care model. And Chief Nolan has been working hard with Judy Hill at the Petawawa Family Health Team on those particulars of an agreement with the County of Renfrew. So basically tipping you to the point that we will have more information coming probably next month, well, in a subsequent month, in August, I guess, on that relationship and how that will be formed. But that's why they're included in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Kelly. Of course, it is, as I had indicated, this is very expansive at its foundation, and it includes, or perhaps was driven from VTAC, but shall not be limited to, I think is probably a good way of framing it. Councillor Nicholson.
I just wanted to echo the support for this proposal. I think this is an excellent initiative. It ties in not just the areas of our corporation's responsibilities, but it also factors in all of those elements that are currently co-located and providing services that are interrelated and impact. You know, a decrease in one area may require an increase in our support. So I think having these voices around the table and being able to come back and make recommendations to this committee, I think it's an excellent leap forward, and I'm fully behind it. Thank you.
Thank you. With nothing further, one of the things that there's two specific things. Not that I'm seeking a job, but if this is essentially a subcommittee reporting up through the health committee, and it is not germane to an individual, but to a position, this is the inception of an advisory group that is probably going to have some significant standing for some time. That I think that it would be appropriate that the chair of the health committee be the chair of the advisory committee. Is that something that would needed to be written into the terms of reference, Mr. Kelly?
To you, Chair, it hasn't. We've left it up to the striking committee to make that determination. So we have not written that into the terms of reference. We've just suggested that 2 elected representatives be appointed.
Okay, thank you. So ultimately, there is a report going to come forward. The striking committee will be convened prior to county council with a report and a recommendation, at which point then the particulars with respect to terms of reference will be engaged, and in fact perhaps even on the reporting coming to council from striking committee, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Because the other item, in addition to the chairship, now this perhaps could be perceived to be the second bullet point, a citizen representative that's engaged in the health sector. One of the things that I think that was of enormous value when we undertook the journey towards the permanency of VTAC was the significant knowledge of the physician recruiter and the increasing number of orphaned patients and how that is germane to VTAC, whether that could be considered within the second bullet point. That maybe is something as well that would be considered through the striking committee as well, or whether to be named as a position individually, correct?
That, to you, Chair, that idea has not been lost on the chief and myself. There is a good resource in the community to be tapped, and we will include that as perhaps a recommendation moving forward. But again, that will be up to the striking committee to consider as well.
Thank you. That being the case, I will defer those to the striking committee, at which point I might have some input as well. Anything further on item number 6? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. On to bylaws, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the addendum. The recommendation that the Health Committee recommended County Council adopt a bylaw authorizing the warden and the CO clerk to sign a contract renewal with 211 Ontario to provide the 211 contact center, or the telephony system, access and support the Renfrew County Virtual Triage and Assessment Center team. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Grills. Background.
Through your chair, the background being that the purpose of this memorandum of understanding between Ontario 211 and the County of Renfrew to provide 211 contact center telephony access and support for the Renfrew County Virtual Triage and Assessment team for the term of July 1, 23 to March 31, 24 in the amount of $22,500 or $2,500 plus HST per month, payable upon receipt from 211. Attached is the appendix. Memorandum of understanding between the County of Renfrew and 211 services, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Discussion, comments, questions? Well, I think this is the first point. Number 7 we got to without a question or a comment. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Now, could I have a motion on the emergency services report as a whole? Please, Councillor Lafreniere, seconded by Councillor Weir. Any further question? All in favor? That is carried as well. Thank you. That we have completed. We are an hour and a half in. Does anyone need? Okay, so this will be a 5-minute break, or in other words, as soon as quorum is reestablished in this room, we shall be coming to order. You have 5. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to immediately yield the floor to Mr. Blackmore for the long-term care report, please.
Thank you, Chair Donahue. Good morning to you and committee members. The long-term care report starts on page 65 of your package. The first item is the long-term care homes accommodation charges, and it pertains to the recently announced rate increase to take effect July 1, 2023. The intent of the rate increase is to mitigate overall inflationary costs. We're going to be seeing an increase of $1.59 a day on the basic rate, bringing the basic rate, monthly rate, to $1,986.82. The premium for a semi-private will increase by 33 cents per day for premium, and private will increase by 69 cents a day, bringing the monthly charges for semi to $23.95.32 and private $28.38.49 a month. Item number 2 is the Monastery Manor and Miramichi Lodge Quality Improvement and Safety Plan Progress Reports. So the committee will recall we had made a submission to the province, to Ontario Health, for our quality improvement plan. I believe that was back in March. And what that was a number of mandatory indicators for which we have to identify our quality numbers for, using the CIHI statistics, CIHI, Canadian Institute of Health Information. That was submitted, approved by council. And the appendices long-term care 1 that you see before you today are an improvement or an enhancement on that original quality improvement plan, given that we are currently undergoing the accreditation process coming up in June. And Accreditation Canada identifies that as the governing committee, as it were, committee and council, that quality should be a standing agenda item. So that's the intent going forward, is to have a quality report. So you see some expanded quality improvement indicators over and above what was on the original QIP. So we've taken the opportunity to basically include what are our minutes for our quality improvement committees for both homes, for which memberships consists of various interdepartmental heads, frontline staff, family, residents sit on this quality improvement committee. And in addition, there are a number of indicators that require an evaluation, whether annually or quarterly, to satisfy the Fixing Long-Term Care Act. So you'll see those indicators identified as well. So what you're seeing in front of you today is our first attempt to amalgamate what were previously 2 separate quality committees, kind of run their own way at each home, and we're trying to align them more closely together so that we're tracking similar indicators and reporting in similar ways. So you'll see your standard, like I said before, the quality improvement indicators from the original QIP. Of note, one of the things we identified was antipsychotic use, for which we had identified we're going to try to get that number down to what is the provincial average. And we identified an opportunity at the lodge to do so just by, it was a bit of a coding error. So anyway, we anticipated that the rates would come down, and indeed they have come below the provincial average in our first internal report. The manor is trending down that way as well. And just, if I could, just, it's a bit convoluted, but just, I will identify there is a bit of a difference with regard to the indicators from our original QIP and what we're seeing in our own quality improvement committees, in that the QIP, we use statistics provided by CIHI, which are months old. And in order to have an effective quality improvement committee, you need actual live data. So the best we're able to do with regard to gathering accurate data is through our own internal documentation system called Point Click Care. So recognize this is our best attempt at identifying live trending, but there is opportunity for it to be slightly off what ultimately will be the CIHI statistics reported 3 quarters from now, a year from now. And again, so this is basically our second kick at it, and we already identified quality as back in March when we submitted our quality improvement plan. So this is our second minuted quality improvement plan observation in our health committee minutes, which of course will go forward to county council and satisfy our Accreditation Canada requirements. Item number 3 is a summary of our recent inspection conducted at Bonnechere Manor about administrative long-term care for the period of April 28th to May 4. It was conducted, as is the case for any time we submit a critical incident or a complaint is received by the ministry will eventually show up to our home and conduct an investigation review or I'm trying to say, an investigation. So what we did end up with was 2 written notifications, which on the scale of observations from the ministry, it's at the lowest, identifying 2 areas requiring improvement, one specific to a medication error, and the other with regard to not following a plan of care. It was around dentures for an individual resident. So the ministry can identify to a home to put together a plan of corrective action. That wasn't the case here, but it's our standard process for both homes. We do so, and both of those things are back in compliance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blackmore. Once again, I would invite committee to return to page 65, information item number 1, the long-term care home accommodation charges. Questions, comments? Item 2, Manor and Lodge quality improvement and safety plan reports. Commend Mr. Blackmore. It has not been our practice heretofore, but as part of the accreditation process, it is a requirement that quality improvement is something that the governance is kept informed on a regular basis. So very pleased at making that start. Item 3, the Ministry of Long-Term Care inspection reports. Sorry, Councillor Nicholson, on item 2.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Chair. Just a quick question. I'll echo your comments, but the effort to gather live data, I think that's an excellent initiative. My question is just, how onerous is that on our staff? Does that take time away from other things? And does it require an investment on our behalf?
Mr. Blackmore, please.
Thank you. Through Chair to Councillor Nicholson. So this is data we're collecting anyhow. Basically, it's what our funding is tied to, and those very high statistics that I'd mentioned earlier, they're one and the same. They come from the same source, but there's potential for error and correction by the time it ultimately gets presented back to us months later. But there's what the high statistics are calculated for all residents over a given period of time, including deceased, and so that's the way we're running our current reports. The hopes that it's going to be as close as possible to the actual CAHA reports, but there is a chance for variation. And no, it is something that we're doing anyhow. It's tied to our NBS. It's what determines our funding.
Follow-up, Councillor Nicholson?
No, that's perfect. I think we can accept that kind of variance in errors, so I applaud you for your effort to keep it live. Thank you.
Thank you. And you raise a valid point, which is that metadata, while it is useful, certainly the localized data is much more granular. I'm assuming that probably in excess of 95% of metadata is probably being reflected in our findings, but there is going to be variation within each home. So thank you for your question. Anything further? Sorry, moving back to item 3 then. Anything on the Ministry of Long-Term Care inspection on the manor? I see none. Moving on to resolutions then, please, Mr. Blackmore.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 4 is a resolution seeking the approval of the multi-sector service accountability agreement Schedule F form of declaration for the Bonnechere Manor Day program. The recommendation that the Health Committee recommend that County Council authorize the Warden and Chief Administrative Officer Clerk to sign the Schedule F declaration of compliance issued pursuant to the multi-sector service accountability agreement for the County of Renfrew, Bonnechere Manor Senior Adult Day Program.
Thank you, Mr. Blackmore. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Any questions, comments? Oh, sorry, I guess background, I missed that.
As background, Chair, through you to committee, Bonnechere Manors have been operating a Senior Adult Day Program in Renfrew since February 1997. The program is available to residents in and around the communities Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Access into the day program is through the Home and Community Support Services. For the continuation of 100% funding for the Bonnechere Manor Senior Adult Day Program, Ontario Health is requesting the signed Schedule F Declaration of Compliance for the period April 1, 2022 to March 31, 2023, attached as Appendix LTC 2.
Thank you, Mr. Blackmore. In the absence of questions, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. On to item 5, please, Mr. Blackmore.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to committee, item number 5 is a resolution for the Bonnechere Manor roofing request for tender. A recommendation that the Health Committee recommend the County Council award the request for tender BM 2023-01 flat roof replacement project for a section of roofing at Bonnechere Manor to Perth Roofing from Perth, Ontario, for roof C no taper at the quoted price of $258,000 inclusive of HST, as approved in the Bonnechere Manor 2023 capital budget.
Once again, committee, could I have a mover, please? Councillor Grills, seconded by Councillor Weir. Background, Mr. Blackmore.
Thank you, Chair. Through to committee, staff is recommending that the committee and council support the award of the Bonnechere Manor request for tender 2023-01 flat roof replacement for project to Perth Roofing with a bid of $258,000, which is within the approved 2023 capital budget. Perth Roofing was the second lowest bidder with a difference of $796.29 over the lowest bidder. However, the lowest bidder is not a certified installer for the specified roofing product. Perth Roofing has been a successful awardee for the past 3 consecutive years for roofing projects at Bonnechere Manor. To maintain the integrity of the warranty on work performed, this year's project ties into last year's project by Perth Roofing. It is advantageous to complete the final section of roofing with Perth Roofing. Given that we have a well-established working relationship with Perth Roofing and that they are a certified installer for the specified product, as well as warranty integrity, staff is requesting Perth Roofing be awarded RFT 2023-01 flat roof replacement project at Bonnechere Manor. Policy GA01, Procurement of Goods and Services Policy Section 7.1F, outlines steps for the procurement of goods when an irregularity exists.
Thank you, Mr. Blackmore. Any questions or comments, committee? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. And moving on to item 6.
Thank you, Chair. Through to committee, item number 6 is the Miramichi Lodge Generator Project. Recommendation that the Health Committee recommend that County Council approve reallocation of the Miramichi Lodge capital funds to cover the unanticipated replacement of 4 chiller relief valves at a cost of $15,000, as well as repairs to the emergency generator at a cost of $14,000. Staff is requesting that the 2023 flooring budget be reduced to $50,000 from $50,000 to $21,000 to cover this unanticipated expenditure, and further that the Finance and Administration Committee be so advised.
Thank you. Mover, please. Warden Emo, seconded by Councillor Wilmer. Any questions or comments? Oh, background.
Background, through the 2023 capital budget for Miramichi Lodge. Approved through the 2023 capital budget for Miramichi Lodge was incremental floor covering replacement at $50,000. Unanticipated repairs are required to maintain the serviceability of the home's HVAC system as well as the emergency generator. In the absence of capital funding set aside for this purpose, staff suggests that this year's allotment for floor replacement capital be reduced to cover the costs associated with the HVAC and emergency generator repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Blackmore. Committee, once again, any questions or comments? Councillor Nicholson, please.
These types of, just the comment about these types of unforecasted capital repairs are not programmed. We don't have going on in the future, if there's any other emergency repairs, we don't have a portion of our capital fund set aside for unforecasted repairs.
Mr. Blackmore.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Nicholson, we do our best to identify the things that we think are going to be in need of repair. We don't have a like a slush fund, as it were, set aside for unanticipated within? Okay, we do.
Well, we have the provision for unallocated funds, but it's tapped.
Okay,
We
it's
tapped it
tapped.
for
There
this
you
year
go.
already.
That's what it was.
Sorry. Yeah.
For the record, it is a provision for unallocated expenses. It is not a slush fund. I just want to make that absolutely clear for the public record. It has been in existence from time immemorial, and it is utilized on a frequent basis for issues such as this, but as Mr. Kelly has indicated, it has been relatively fully exploited. Okay, you are satisfied, Councillor Nicholson. Thank you. Anything further? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Can I have a mover on the long-term care report as a whole, please? Councillor Weir, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. The Board of Health minutes are before everyone. I guess the resolution is, I'd seek a resolution to receive these, correct?
To receive his information.
To
sir.
receive his information. Could I have a motion to receive? Councillor Lafreniere, seconded by Councillor Grills. Any questions, comments? I just had one. Perhaps I will put this forward to any of the three members present of County, well, and in fact, Councillor Purcell. So we have four members of the Board of Health present. I note these are the minutes from April. In December, the expectation was in the then, the now as well, in the CEO's report, that the April meeting was going to be live streamed to YouTube. And I asked this because this was something near and dear to me that I had been advocating for at the Board of Health probably for about the last 4 years, of having that public transparency with respect to live streaming. And the expectation was that that was going to transpire at the April meeting per the CEO's report of December 2022. I wondered, do any of the members of the Board of Health present have any update on when that is anticipated to roll out? Councillor Purcell, I will invite you first.
Based on my knowledge, I wasn't aware that they were looking at being televised and recorded. There is a meeting next week in terms of the governance committee, and I will bring that forward to the chair to discuss that. I know that next week will be the first, I guess, in-person meeting that we're going to have as the Board of Health. So it'll be interesting to see, what transpires out of that meeting. But I will bring that back to committee and get an answer.
Okay, and that being the case, perhaps Councillor Purcell, I can forward to you at the conclusion of the meeting. I'll get your coordinates. So reading directly from the CEO's report of December, the recommendation is to begin using the Zoom platform for board meetings in April 2023, with the April 25th board meeting live streamed and uploaded to YouTube. So that was the predication of the question that I'm asking, so that might be of use to you, taking that forward to your governance committee.
Sorry, just in response, yes, they did switch platforms from Microsoft, I guess it's Teams to the Zoom platform, but I'm just not aware in terms of the recording.
Thank you. Anyway, I will talk to you at the conclusion of the committee meeting. Anything further? Seeing nothing, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. New business. So has this been distributed, Mr. Kelly, to everyone's desks?
Yes, it has,
It is
sir.
before everyone? Okay. So everyone has the correspondence that is, if not hot off the press, it is lukewarm off the press. It is dated today's date. Mr. Kelly, I would invite you perhaps to speak to this, as it's not part of the report today.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to committee. So as oft mentioned throughout Chief Nolan's report today, we meaning the community surrounding the City of Ottawa got together, my gosh, about 2 weeks ago or a week ago, a week ago with wardens and CAOs to discuss a motion from Warden Peckford of Leeds and Grenville to go to the City of Ottawa with a delegation to meet about cross-border billing, as was referenced today several times. They have a very they have a lot of pressure in Prescott Russell, Leeds and Grenville, more than ours. However, as good neighbors, we combined efforts with them, and as well as Lanark County, on dealing with the issues of cross-border billing and the delays of offload delays as well. So, what Leeds and Grenville had offered to do was to send out a letter to all of the neighboring communities with a request to set up a working group of these communities to address the issue of cross-border billing and other systemic issues. So unfortunately, this letter just arrived this morning, so we didn't have a chance to write an addendum up. But if I was to write an addendum up, I would have had a recommendation that would suggest that the Health Committee recommended County Council that the County of Renfrew join a working group of neighboring municipalities to address the issue of cross-border paramedic billing and other systemic issues. Now, perhaps Chair, the Warden, may have some more to add than he's already added today, but I'll leave that to you.
Okay, and I'm pleased at what you had suggested. This is the process, the structure, the regime that is adhered to with respect to issues and the approach in developing policy process. As I have often repeated in here, I am uncomfortable with policy on the fly, but I am certainly prepared to entertain that because it's appropriate that a recommendation come from this committee to council. We still do have 8 days, so perhaps a formal, but I would still seek, perhaps, Warden Emo, you may have consideration towards the wording of a resolution that we could consider here and pass with a recommendation to go to council as part of the Health Committee report, as opposed to a piece of new business.
Sure. And the genesis of this was with the report that came, the Rubenstein report that came to the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. It came on the floor there that it might be something that the Wardens Caucus should get involved in. But the other members, the other 8 members for the most part, or I guess 7 members, don't have the pressure in Ottawa that we have. They have pressures around Trenton and Belleville and Kingston, which, you know, I think the strategy that emerged was that we should go ahead and try and resolve the issue. And they would follow along with their community hubs if necessary. And so we devolved it down to a smaller group. And Leeds and Grenville were ready to go off on their own, but didn't want to step out on the other partners and maybe inadvertently trample on initiatives. So the idea was to get together the political, the administrative CAO side and the paramedics, just to make sure we understood what strategies everybody was using, the relationship with Ottawa. And so we have a letter, we've got the terms nailed down a little bit. And so there's going to be a good letter go to Ottawa and to Kingston with some information and requesting meetings. So this makes sense in terms of trying to resolve the situation, and we've also confirmed that we would, subject to our respective councils, again meet in July to move this along. So we're not taking a break over the summer. We're committed to making it work, but we knew we had to get a foundation of council's buy-in prior to operating any further. We felt that, you know, the first meeting was an extension of the Rubenstein report, but to generate any real action and to tie up resources, because there will be some resources that we should get the blessing of our respective councils.
Okay, thank you. So before I would consider a resolution that is in keeping with the request here, just for those who may not be aware, given the turnover in councils, both at the City of Pembroke and with the County of Renfrew, and I would invite Chief Nolan to step in wherein I am in error. But in 2017 or 2018, the Ambulance Act was amended by the province. Amongst other changes that were adopted by the province. One change was that there had been a statutory obligation to have a reconciliation. The province, backing up a step further, the province with the paramedic service as the funder of ostensibly half requires a seamless provision of paramedic service, which means that the provincial participation doesn't recognize the municipal boundaries. So wherein we are required, or any paramedic service is required to provide service where needed. So there had to been a statutory requirement, obligation upon municipalities to reconcile because it does go in the other direction, but it has still been a net drain on our service and a contribution towards the City of Ottawa. I believe that was in 2017 or 2018. I believe that we have, whether informally or I think we may actually have formal agreements with some of the other surrounding upper tiers, counties, county governments, wherein there is that continuing reconciliation that has not been ensuing with the City of Ottawa. It's probably most acute now given the dramatic rise in the offload delay, which I might add the City of Ottawa is subject to as well. But that is the source, that is the kernel of the grievance, the irritation that has been ongoing in that by times the surrounding paramedic services, I think, have been acting almost as surge backup for the City of Ottawa. Very pleased that the warden brought forward the intent of the City of Ottawa to significantly expand their paramedic service over a 3-year period by 120 paramedics. I'm assuming that there is a concomitant intent towards an expansion such as we have undertaken here. This, I think, is absolutely something that we should be a part of, and I think it should be seen within the overall dynamic, as I had spoken to earlier, of the data points of the Rubenstein report, et cetera, wherein the dispatch model changes, the proposed increase to the City of Ottawa, I think are going to have significant mitigating factors. I think likewise the first paragraph on the second page speaks to an enormous gap wherein Kingston Community CAC, Central Ambulance Communication Center, is not in the first cohort. So I think certainly that's something that should also be advocated, that this region that will extend down to those areas serviced and servicing neighboring to Kingston, that's vitally important. But I think it is important. There's an opportunity here with, I think within the City of Ottawa, a complete turnover from the mayor extending down through emergency services, down through the chief of the paramedics, et cetera, where the conversation can be reignited, and I think that this is something that we should be participating in. So I would invite then, I guess, a resolution recommending that the County of Renfrew participate in the working group formed. We can polish this up, I'm presuming.
Yeah, no, that was, if I could, Chair.
Do you have some wording, Mr. Kelly?
I do, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, my hero for today.
So, well, there you go. We'll see how that goes all day. The Health Committee recommend to County Council that the County of Renfrew join a working group of neighboring municipalities to address the issue of cross-border paramedic billing and other systemic issues.
And Warden, you are prepared to move that. A seconder by Councillor Murphy. Any discussion? Warden Nemo.
Thank you. I should add that when we had our conversation, the cross-border billing issue as an important issue rolled down a little bit because we very quickly recognized, once we turned to the professionals in the room, that the MPDS system was probably of primary importance, and then also the issue of offload delay. Ottawa informs us that they lose 42 staff per day to the offload problems in the Ottawa district. So that's why when I spoke earlier about finding some common ground, we think we can find common ground on those two other issues. And again, I hate to say this, but when we talked about the cross-border billing, it wasn't seen, to be as big an issue as the lost time for the Ottawa service and the other 4 services. So, we're trying to prioritize our battles. We will, have some ongoing discussions about cross-border billing. And as you noted correctly, most of the, if not all, and I believe all of the services, paramedic services within the Warden's Caucus already have their formalized relationships. So, if Ottawa opts in, great. If Ottawa doesn't opt in, we're not going to waste this opportunity to do some other good things with them. But the time spent on offload delays is the killer. It's not the money, it's the time. I'm not going to say wasted time, it's the downtime where we could be doing something a little more fulfilling. So thank you.
Thank you. It is, of course, important to note, though, as the chief did, every paramedic service is subject to offload delays. The challenge for our paramedic service, that I'm assuming is reflected amongst the other surrounding municipalities as well, is that even when not in Ottawa, frankly, our Arnprior base may be the responding paramedic service to the westernmost parts of the city of Ottawa, i.e. Fitzroy, Kinburn, etc. So I think that it is compounded. The offload delays are compounded for us even more acutely if we are in Ottawa on a transfer or something like that. Our paramedics with Renfrew, County of Renfrew on the door may actually get dispatched to the east end of Ottawa because they're the only available ambulance. And that is happening more frequently than the reverse. So I think that all of the surrounding municipalities and services are net negative in the service provided to the City of Ottawa. Any further questions? Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of the membership of the working group, would that include yourself? Would our warden be representing Eastern Ontario in that?
I would assume that this that this was discussed. The genesis of this seems to have been the Eastern Ontario Warden's Caucus. The letter here is specific to the warden from Leeds and Grenville, who does sit on the caucus. This is not the full caucus. This is a subset of the eastern section, if you will. I think there's 13 participants in the caucus, but I think perhaps 7 might be recognized here. I'll defer to you, Warden Ema.
No, there's 5 of us, and I will be part of it. I've been tasked with a few tasks. So yes, I will remain part of it on an ongoing basis, and all the CAOs and all the paramedic chiefs will be involved. I think some of the existing wardens, there's probably 2 that are quite content to let the rest of us move it along.
In answer to your question, though, Councillor Nicholson, should something happen, I am prepared to pinch hit on short notice. Anything further? Councillor Lafreniere.
I hate to step back, but can I ask a question in regards to the Community Health Programs Advisory Committee before the end of the meeting?
No, actually, I'm not going to do that because we still have a
Okay, I'll talk to you after the meeting.
Please do. If you do have a question on the letter before us and the resolution before us to join this work, okay, thank you. Anything further than on the request and the resolution before us? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So now we find ourselves at item 12. Would seek a motion to go into a closed meeting pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended for the purpose of A, labor relations or employee negotiations, B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, reorganization, and remind council there is an item C, which is with respect to the property.
A potential property purchase.
Okay, acquisition. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Weir, seconded by Councillor Grills. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We'll leave some time for those going ashore. Thank you, everyone, for your patience that are watching either live streaming or in a recording. We are returned to open session. All that we have left before us now is item 13. The date of the next meeting shall be Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. I would wish everyone a very healthy and happy and safe summer, and we will pick this up again in August. I would now seek a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Weir, seconded by Councillor Purcell. All in favor? That is carried. We are adjourned, committee.